Hello, today we're presenting Conflict in Education, the Need for Positive Change in Native American Education. I'm Julie Lurwell.
I'm Melita Jackson.
And I'm Shawnee Personius. We will begin our discussion going over a brief history of pre-contact, colonization, boarding schools, and native sovereignty.
And I will be taking you through present and current issues of Native American students in public education.
And I'll finish with presenting possible solutions for how to address disparities in the public school system for Native learners and their families.
So we're going to start out with pre-contact. As you can see above is North America pre-Columbus in 1942. North America's history did not start when Christopher Columbus landed in San Salvador in 1942, even though American history books will lead one to believe that. For Native peoples, it began when their ancestors fell from the sky, emerged from under the earth, were transformed from ash trees into people, entered the world through a hollow log, or entered through the Bering Strait from Siberia. Native creation stories and oral traditions of most Native tribes explain how their people have always lived on the land known as North America. Before Columbus, Native peoples settled the land and developed ways of living on it by creating communities, trade routes, and developing the land. Firm archaeological evidence of American presence in North America more than 12,000 years ago. Some estimates push habitation as far as 40,000 years back. North America was not even close to an open landscape when Columbus found it. Current history books are filled with hundreds of pages of post-Columbus, but very few pre-contact, and this needs a change. The population of Native peoples in North America decreased by 95% from the time Columbus came to America in 1942 and to the establishment of the United States in 1776. The decline was due to intentional killing and lack of resistance of diseases, mainly dealing with smallpox and also secondary health concerns like pneumonia and famine. And this is what caused the drastic decline. Europeans also introduced alcohol, which natives became heavily addicted to. President Andrew Jackson approved the Indian Removal Act of 1830, initiating the use of treaties in exchange for native lands east of the Mississippi River and forcing relocation of as many of 100,000 native peoples. In 1838, the Cherokee Nation was removed to reservations in what has been called the Trail of Tears. It's estimated that almost 8,000 Cherokee people died on the 800-mile forced march or there shortly after. And this is just one of countless undocumented instances of removal. In 1871, the U.S. Congress declared the Native Americans ward of the U.S. government. In 1876, the U.S. government had obtained the majority of Native lands, and Native people were forced to either live on reservations or relocate to urban areas. Reservations were almost always less than appropriate parcels of land, which were hard to develop. Because of this, natives became dependent on European goods to survive. In 1860, when the Bureau of Indian Affairs established the first Indian boarding school on the Yakima Indian Reservation in the state of Washington, these schools were created by Herbert Welsh and Henry Pentecost, planned to assimilate the Indians. An Army officer, Richard Pratt, founded the first of these schools. He based it on an education program he had developed in an Indian prison. He described his philosophy in a speech he gave in 1892. A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one, Pratt said. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indians there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian and save the man. By 1880, there were 60 schools that had 6,200 Native students. These schools were both boarding schools and day schools. The goal of these reforms was to use education as a tool to assimilate the Indian tribes into the mainstream American way of life, a Protestant ideology of the mid-19th century. Indian people would be taught the importance of private property, material wealth, and monogamous nuclear families. Government and church-run boarding schools would take Native children from their families at the age of 4 or 5 and not allow any contact with their Native relations for a minimum of 8 years. In the boarding schools, Native children had their hair cut and were dressed like European American children. Additionally, all sacred items were taken from them, and they are forbidden to use their native language or practice traditional rituals and religions. Many children were abused physically and sexually, and they also developed a variety of problematic coping strategies. For the sake of our children, for the sake of the spiritual and material well-being of our total community, we must be able to demonstrate competency to ourselves. For the sake of our psychic stability, as well as our physical well-being, we must be free men and exercise free choices. We must be able to learn and profit by our own mistakes. Only then can we become competent and prosperous community. We must be free in the most literal sense of the word, not sold or coerced into accepting programs for our own good, not of our own making, our own choice. Clyde Warrior. Clyde Warrior was one of the most charismatic and one of the most important leaders of the National Indian Council. Tribal sovereignty is the inherent authority of indigenous tribes to govern themselves within the borders of the United States. The Marshall Trilogy is a set of 3 Supreme Court decisions in the early 19th century that affirmed the legal and political standing of Indian nations. The first was Johnson versus McIntosh in 1823, holding that private citizens could not purchase lands from Native Americans. The second was Cherokee Nation versus Georgia in 1831, holding that Cherokee Nation dependent with a relationship to the United States like that of a ward to its guardian. And the third was Brewster versus Georgia in 1832, which laid out the relationship between the tribes and the state and the federal government, stating that the federal government was the sole authority to deal with Indian nations.
All right, so with current issues in public schools and Native American students, actually kind of bouncing off what Shawnee had said, a lot of boarding schools are still running today, and actually a lot of Native Americans prefer to go to them because they currently actually have accepted their culture and allow them to do more of their cultural stuff now as opposed to public schooling. So with that transition, some of the things I'll be talking about is the BIE, public versus rural schooling, and the relevance of an education. The Bureau of Indian Education, formerly known as the Office of Indian Education Programs, under treaty claims, aside from the Department of Defense schools, Native American schools are federally funded, and like most treaties made with Native Americans, wasn't held to the best of its ability. Most of the issues that come from the Bureau of Education is that most of it's just writing on paper, while the schools and the parents are waiting for actual, like the BIE to actually do anything with what they're saying. Although the BIE has made some strides since the days of snatching children from their parents' homes and communities and tried to forcibly strip them of their cultural well-being, as an underfunded and understaffed agency in Washington, its process to get anything moving in terms of service to its students still hold a colonial mindset. As a whole, only 8% of Native Americans attend BIE schools run in the United States, but that's still 40,000 students, 183 schools, 64 reservations, and in 23 states. And the Senate had last claimed that the lack of high quality education in the school system was a national tragedy. "92% of Native Americans attend public school. Despite the high percentage of Native Americans going to public school, Native people only make up about 1% of public schools population because of the Native people in public schools often, because of this, sorry, Native people often feel invisible as there isn't usually another Native in the class. This feeling of invisibility can increase as schools don't accurately account for Native people's history, either generalizing Native history during the first contact or glossing over the nitty-gritty details, or even educating their students in a way that makes out that America's indigenous peoples didn't survive first contact at all, and gives the assumption that there are no indigenous peoples left. This also increases or decreases cultural connectedness, and the lack of cultural connectedness in public school can attribute to the feeling of being invisible. When teachers and administration just don't know how or refuse to be culturally sensitive, it often leads to misunderstandings, assumptions, and Native Americans feeling singled out or forgotten. Native American students are also more often considered at risk, meaning they come from broken homes, divorced families, substance abuse within the family members in jail. And through this can often be the case. And due to historical trauma, the children are being treated as problematic children as opposed to getting help that they need to be able to cope with some of these problems at home. And this causes students to have negative viewings of school, and this causes dropout rates to increase.
I just want to say too, I just wanted to add, Melita, to what you said about 1% of public school population are Native students, but I know here in Humboldt County that it's closer to 7%. And at Morris Elementary, I was speaking with a friend, a teacher there, who said their Native population was 11%. So I think that's important to acknowledge just locally what's happening in our schools here.
Yeah, with that in mind too, we have to keep in mind that this is actually a pretty unique area in that we have like 5 tribes within Humboldt County alone, which isn't much heard of within other expansive within the United States.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on.
So then this last slide is the relevance of education. After speaking with a couple of Native people in the education field within our local area and asking them what they think the current issues are when it comes to the education system and Native people today, the answers were pretty similar. Jennifer George, a Hoopa tribal member and principal of the Hoopa Elementary, stated that a lot of students are wondering what the worth is of an education. Is it worth the debt, the job security? Can they bring the education back to their culture and people? Will they get the education they want as opposed to whitewashed versions of history, for instance? There's a stress and anxiety that they'll put so much effort into their education but won't get much of a reward or payoff when it's all over. Marlette Grant Jackson, Yurok tribal member and academic advisor at Humboldt State University, refers to Maslow's hierarchy of school needs, stating, "Our kids have been shown to be missing 2 of the 4 school needs for a student to learn." So if you look at this pyramid here on the slide, and she states, so if you think of it as stacking chairs, they may be missing a basic need like clean clothing. So they get picked on at school for having dirty clothing or wearing the same outfit every day, and that's a negative view of schooling because they're getting picked on. So you would take a leg away, so then you would have a 3-legged chair, which doesn't seem too bad, but you would still have to figure out how to balance that out to be able to keep learning, to keep going to school. But when you add another chair on top of that, and it's also missing a leg, so it becomes, let's see, if it just, for instance, belonging, one of the examples is like a positive role model, students may not get this, and that's another leg missing. So then it becomes this kind of tipsy turny thing of trying to figure out how to balance everything and still go to school and be able to cope with that. A lot of Marlette students, something will happen in their life and she thinks that's it. There's nothing more, like they won't continue any further with their education because it's just another leg broken and they can't figure out how to balance that out. And sometimes she's proven wrong, and she that's like the one time that she's okay with being wrong. But when they can't figure out how to balance all this out and can't figure out how to go on with their education, there's almost no talking them out of just dropping out.
Okay. So moving on to possible solutions. Part of this, these are just some of the solutions that were talked about in the reading that I came across. So educating the educators and staff, creating cultural awareness in teaching degree programs, professional development for cultural competency, and paying attention to different learning styles and creating general awareness within school staff cultures. Also, culturally aware curriculum, which should include mission studies and history from Native perspectives, and bringing in Native speakers into the classroom. Teaching awareness and mindfulness. There was a study done with Native students using transcendental meditation that found improvements in overall health and well-being, a 15% higher graduation rate, increased grades, GPA, greater focus, and improved self-confidence. And then also very important is to have resources for teachers and staff, and students and families. And so I have a friend who is a teacher at Morris Elementary, and it was interesting speaking with her to hear about her story. She's been a teacher at Morris now for 5 years. And so her name is Kendra. They call her Miss Kendra. And Kendra graduated from the HSU education program in 2014. She explained to me that part of the program at HSU was learning about cultural competency, marginalized communities, and that she also spoke about how they taught about microaggression, which she said was very informative and eye-opening for her personally. Kendra also did, to further her study, she did an online program through Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, which was specifically for teachers, that was taught by Native teachers. So she is at Morris Elementary, and Morris had a Native speaker come in to present to staff about inclusive curriculum, which included teaching the core standard for mission lessons from a Native perspective, and literature recommendations that promote cultural understanding of Native living. Through information Kendra got from the speaker that presented at Morris, she found a curriculum on the missions called A Time of Resistance, which she taught to her students and then shared with other teachers who also changed their curriculum to this model. Kendra said that in staff meetings at Morris, there are ongoing conversations and discussions about Native student issues. For example, the topic of the imbalance of IEPs, individual education plans for Native students, and the importance to avoid stigmatization. So these are resources that I found. The two curriculums at the top through Sacramento State and the Klamath Trinity Indian Education Program, these two curriculums, they have pretty extensive websites that provide much information for lesson plans on mission programs, reading materials, and other curriculum, and have teaching resources for teachers. Also, the Humboldt County Department for Health and Human Services website provides an extensive list of local organizations that has descriptions of the services that they provide, including contact information for local tribes, health services, counseling services, and social services. So in conclusion, the main points are learning about the history from the perspective of pre-contact in this country. Also, important facts of Native history and culture is important for inclusion of Native students, as well as for everyone, for society as a whole. Teaching a culturally aware curriculum inclusive of Indigenous peoples' perspectives is a responsibility that we as educators need to strive for to benefit all students. And promoting awareness of Native cultures can encourage more involvement for Native students, pride in their culture and themselves. This creates a healthier learning environment. So for teachers, I know that it may seem daunting to make these changes in curriculum and can feel like even more work to an already overworked teacher schedule. However, teachers are one of our children's greatest resources and allies, and children truly are the future for all of us. We believe that the Native voices and people of this land are important and provide value and wisdom for all of us to learn from. When we try to provide more equal footing to all students, we stand stronger as a community. Thank you for letting us present this information today, and please contact us with any questions or need for further resources. We'd like to close by showing a video that was created by Ojibwe students in Ontario, Canada. But first off, Johnny and Melita, do you have anything else to add?
I had actually wanted to say too that California actually has passed the thing to fund Native American education, but didn't put any funding behind that.
Yeah.
So, and that was back in 2000. So I think even just being aware of our laws as well, and being to push administration to do more, not just relying on the teachers because they have so much to do already, but even our lawmakers and our administration and our education boards.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also just it is kind of at this point time for our culture as a whole to step up and be a part of decolonization, and not just pass it on to other people. And part of that is really understanding that educating themselves and understanding the facts and what has happened, and looking at a whole how do we move forward together and becoming part of the solution and part of the healing.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, should we close with this video?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Nashco, So many broken homes. Have you seen where we live? The stories seem so old. How much more can we give? Searching for the truth. It's been so hard to find. As the blind leads the blind, we sing water is life.
So much information, so let's try to boil light up the next generation. We can have a good meal, lots of clean water. I want to see the changes and share teachings. Be brave and be courageous.
You gotta recognize the pain is neglected. You say you care about a struggle as we wait for connection. Every day is a blessing, so the change will address it. We bring hope to the youth in the face of depression.
Do you see what I see? Hey, hey, do you hear what I hear? Hey, hey, do you dream what I dream? This and our mission of inspired prayers. We're fire makers. Do you hear my voice? I'm not afraid to let it out. I made the choice to live my life and stand my ground. Our culture fills the void. The 7 teachings make me proud. My pride, it burns. It's what the fire is found.
Dancing is my medicine. It started in the 5th grade. I came out my comfort zone, now waiting for a big chance. There's so much to do, and it may seem impossible, but with your support, the youth are unstoppable.
Wolf is inside me. I represent humility. I want to be good. I've been seeing life differently. Treat me equally. Treat me with dignity. This is our time. We can rewrite history. Do you see what I see? Hey, hey, do you hear what I hear? Hey, hey, do you dream what I dream? Peace and our mission of inspired prayers. We're fire makers.
Calling business at work.
Miss Ganesh Kote, Miss Ganesh Kote.
Listen, no wish, no.
Do you see the smoke? A signal to the sky. It's fire in my soul. It's how we have survived. This is my home. A change will come in time. Our spirits will go where Anishinaabe for life.
Built up aggression, let's respect sacred places. So many changes are needed to feel the safest. I've been keeping the fire while dream chasing. Learn and teach the ways so we can be the
Our
greatest.
leaders haven't shaken hands, we seem busy making plans, changes. I'll pray for that, I'll fight for these native lands of culture. We'll take it back, my people not afraid to dance. Just want to keep the fire burning and make it last.
Do you see what I see? Hey, hey, do you hear what I hear? Hey, hey, do you dream what I dream? Peace and our mission of inspired prayers. We're fire makers. We're fire makers. We're fire makers.